Have you ever heard someone say, "Oh, that's DOT hazardous," or "It's EPA hazardous," and think, wait, aren't they the same thing? Same word, right? Hazardous. Here's the kicker. They're not even close. And getting this wrong can lead to fines, violations, or worse, a cleanup bill that'll make your accountant cry. In this video, we're unpacking what DOT hazardous and EPA hazardous actually mean, why non-regulated doesn't mean you're safe, and how to make sure you're handling your materials the right way. Stick around, because by the end, you'll know exactly how to avoid one of the most common and costly compliance mistakes out there. Hi there, I'm Doug Rulin from RMA, your environmental experts. We've helped hundreds of facilities figure out what's truly regulated, what's not, and how to stay out of trouble with both DOT and EPA. Before we go too far, just know this. If you ever need a hand making sense of hazardous waste classifications or other waste management rules, you can always reach out to us here at RMA. So here's the big picture. DOT and EPA may both use the word hazardous, but they regulate totally different things. DOT, the Department of Transportation, only cares about materials while they're moving on the road. It's all about transportation safety. They want to make sure people, property, and the environment are protected when that truck, train, or barge is on the road. EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, on the other hand, cares about what happens before and after that trip. They're focused on how you store, use, and dispose of those materials once they become waste. Here's the simplest way to remember it. DOT equals transport, EPA equals waste management. So a substance could be hazardous under DOT rules while it's being shipped, like acetone, a flammable liquid, but not be EPA hazardous until it's used up and thrown out. Or the opposite, it might not be a DOT regulated material when transported, but the moment it becomes waste, EPA says it is hazardous. That's where the confusion and the violations usually happen. Under DOT rules, hazardous materials are anything that pose an unreasonable risk in transport. Flammables, corrosives, gases, explosives, radioactive materials, all that. There are 9 hazard classes, and each one has its own packaging, labeling, and paperwork requirements. EPA's definition, though, comes from the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, or RCRA. That classifies hazardous waste either by listing it specifically or by testing it for things like ignitability, corrosivity, reactivity, or toxicity. That's where the phrase cradle to grave comes in. Once you generate a hazardous waste, you're responsible for it until it's properly treated or disposed of. Now let's talk about the most misunderstood phrase in this whole world, DOT non-regulated. When someone, usually a vendor or transporter, says that a material is DOT non-regulated, all that means is it's not considered a hazardous material for transportation purposes. That's it. But too often people hear that and think, that means not hazardous at all. That's wrong. Dead wrong. Let's say you got used solvent rags. A transporter might say, these are DOT non-regulated. We can haul them as regular solid waste or trash. But under EPA rules, those rags could easily be considered hazardous waste because of the ignitable solvent residues. So while the DOT might not require special labels or placards, EPA absolutely might require proper storage, labeling, manifest, and disposal at a licensed facility. If you miss that, you're looking at unpermitted storage, improper disposal, and some seriously expensive enforcement actions. And don't forget, most states run their own hazardous waste programs that are often stricter than the federal EPA rules. So you might be compliant with DOT, but still out of compliance with your state environmental agency. Here's the bottom line. DOT cares about materials in motion. EPA cares about materials at rest. And your state likely cares about both. When you understand the difference, everything makes sense. When you don't, that non-regulated label can turn into a really expensive problem. At RMA, we see this confusion every day. Vendors throw around the word hazardous like it's one size fits all. It's not. DOT non-regulated doesn't mean safe. It just means the DOT isn't in charge of that shipment. The EPA or your state probably still is. So before you take anyone's word for it, double check. Ask the right questions. And if something doesn't sound quite right, reach out to us here at RMA. We'll help you figure out what's really regulated and by who, so that non-hazardous doesn't become a major problem for you.